Welcome to our channel. Hollywood Movie Review. American Sniper 2014 Movie Review. American Sniper is a 2014 American biographical war drama film directed and co-produced by Clint Eastwood and written and executive produced by Jason Hall, based on the memoir of the same name by Chris Kyle with Scott McEwen and Jim DeFelice. The film follows the life of Kyle, who became the deadliest marksman in U.S. military history with 255 kills from 4 tours in the Iraq War, 160 of which were officially confirmed by the Department of Defense. While Kyle was celebrated for his military successes, his tours of duty took a heavy toll on his personal and family life. It stars Bradley Cooper as Kyle and Sienna Miller as his wife Taya, with Luke Grimes, Jake McDorman, Corey Hardrict, Kevin Lax, Naveed Negahban, and Keir O'Donnell in supporting roles. American Sniper premiered at the American Film Institute Festival on November 11, 2014, and had a limited theatrical release in the United States on December 25, 2014 by Warner Bros. Pictures, followed by a wide release on January 16, 2015. It received generally positive reviews, with praise for Cooper's lead performance and Eastwood's direction, although it also attracted some controversy over its portrayal of both the Iraq War and Kyle himself. The film grossed over $547 million worldwide, making it the 13th highest grossing film of 2014, and Eastwood's highest grossing film. At the 87th Academy Awards, American Sniper received 6 nominations, including Best Picture, Best Adapted Screenplay, and Best Actor for Cooper, ultimately winning 1 for Best Sound Editing. Growing up in Texas, Chris Kyle is taught by his father how to shoot a rifle and hunt deer. Years later, Chris has become a ranch hand and rodeo cowboy, and returns home early to find his girlfriend in bed with another man. After telling her to leave, he sees news coverage of the 1998 U.S. Embassy bombings and decides to enlist in the Navy. He qualifies for special training and becomes a sniper with the U.S. Navy SEALs. Chris meets Taya Studebaker at an Irish pub in San Diego, and the two soon marry. He is sent to the Iraq War after the September 11 attacks. His first kills are a woman and a boy who attacked U.S. Marines on patrol with a Russian-made RKG-3 anti-tank grenade. Chris is visibly upset by the experience, but later earns the nickname Legend for his many kills. Assigned to hunt for the Al-Qaeda leader, Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, Chris interrogates a family whose father offers to lead the SEALs to the Butcher, al-Zarqawi's second-in-command. The plan goes awry when the Butcher captures the father and his son, killing them while a sniper pins down Chris. This sniper goes by the name Mustafa and is an Olympic Games medalist from Syria. Meanwhile, the insurgents issue a bounty on Chris. Chris returns home to his wife and the birth of his son. He is distracted by memories of his war experiences and by Taya's concern for them as a couple. She wishes he would focus on his home and family. Chris leaves for a second tour and is promoted to Chief Petty Officer. Involved in a shootout with the Butcher, he helps kill him. Chris becomes increasingly distant from his family when he returns home to a newborn daughter. On Chris's third tour, Mustafa seriously injures a unit member, Ryan Biggles' job, and the unit is evacuated back to base. When they decide to return to the field and continue the mission, another SEAL, Mark Lee, is killed by gunfire. Guilt compels Chris to undertake a 4th tour, and Taya tells him she may not be there when he returns. Back in Iraq, Chris is shocked to learn Biggles died in surgery to repair the wounds he sustained. Assigned to kill Mustafa, who has been sniping U.S. Army combat engineers building a barricade, Chris's sniper team is placed on a rooftop inside enemy territory. Chris spots Mustafa and takes him out with a risky long-distance shot at 2,100 yards, 1,920 m, but this exposes his team's position to numerous armed insurgents. Amid the gunfight and low on ammunition, Chris tearfully calls Taya and tells her he is ready to come home. A sandstorm provides concealment for a chaotic escape in which he is injured and almost left behind. After Chris gets back stateside, On edge and unable to adjust fully to civilian life, a Veterans Affairs psychiatrist asks if he is haunted by all the things he did in war. When he replies that all the guys couldn't save haunt him, the psychiatrist encourages him to help severely wounded veterans in the VA hospital. After that, Chris gradually begins to adjust to home life. Years later, on February 2, 2013, Chris says goodbye to his wife and family as he leaves in good spirits to spend time with Eddie Ray Routh, a veteran suffering from PTSD, at a shooting range. An on-screen subtitle reveals that Chris was killed that day by Routh, followed by archive footage of crowds standing along the highway for his funeral procession. More are shown attending his memorial service. On May 24, 2012, it was announced that Warner Bros. Had acquired the rights to the book, with Bradley Cooper set to produce and star in the screen adaptation. Cooper had thought of Chris Pratt to play Chris Kyle, but Warner Bros. Agreed to buy it only if Cooper would star. In September 2012, David O. Russell said he was interested in directing the film. On February 2, 2013, Chris Kyle was murdered. On May 2, 2013, it was announced that Steven Spielberg would direct. Spielberg had read Kyle's book, though he desired to have a more psychological conflict present in the screenplay so an enemy sniper character could serve as the insurgent sharpshooter who was trying to track down and kill Kyle. Spielberg's ideas contributed to the development of a lengthy screenplay approaching 160 pages. Due to Warner Bros. Budget constraints, Spielberg felt he could not bring his vision of the story to the screen. On August 5, 2013, Spielberg dropped out of directing. On August 21, 2013, it was reported that Clint Eastwood would instead direct the film. On March 14, 2014, Sienna Miller joined the cast. On March 16, 2014, Kyle Gallner was cast, as was Corey Hardrict on March 18, 2014. On March 20, 2014, Navid Negabon, Eric Close, Eric Ladine, Ray Gallegos, and Jake McDorman also joined the cast, as did Luke Grimes and Sam Yeager on March 25, 2014. Kevin Lax, a former Navy SEAL, was also cast and served as a technical advisor. Another former Navy SEAL, Joel Lambert, also joined the film, portraying a Delta sniper. On June 3, Max Charles was added to the cast to portray Kyle's son, Colton Kyle. Principal photography began on March 31, 2014, in Los Angeles, with additional filming in Morocco. On April 23, the Los Angeles Times reported that 10 days of filming set in an Afghan village was set to begin at the Blue Cloud Movie Ranch in the Santa Clarita area. On May 7, shooting of the film was spotted around El Centro. A milk factory was used as the abandoned date factory which insurgents close in on from all directions at the climax of the film. The pier and bar scenes were filmed in Seal Beach, California. Cinematographer Tom Stern shot the film with Arri Alexa XT digital cameras and Panavision C-E and G series anamorphic lenses. The film is Eastwood's second to be shot digitally, after Jersey Boys. There is no music by credit on this film. Clint Eastwood, who has composed the scores for most of his films since Mystic River, 2003, is credited as the composer of Taya's theme. Joseph Estabisi is credited as composer of additional music and as music editor. The film also features the song Someone Like You by Van Morrison, which plays during the wedding scene, and The Funeral by Ennio Morricone. American Sniper grossed $350.2 million in North America and $197.5 million in other territories for a worldwide total of $547.7 million, against a budget of around $59 million. Calculating in all expenses and revenues, Deadline Hollywood estimated that the film made a profit of $243 million, making it the second most profitable film of 2014, only behind Paramount's Transformers: Age of Extinction. Worldwide, it is the highest-grossing war film of all time, breaking Saving Private Ryan's record, and Eastwood's highest-grossing film to date. It is the seventh R-rated film to gross over $500 million. In North America, it was the highest-grossing film of 2014, the highest-grossing war film unadjusted for inflation, and, on an adjusted basis, second to Saving Private Ryan with $379 million, the fourth highest-grossing R-rated film of all time, behind The Passion of the Christ, Deadpool and Wolverine, Warner Brothers' fourth highest-grossing film, behind The Dark Knight Rises and Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Part 2, and the eighth highest-grossing Best Picture nominee film, behind Avatar, Titanic, Star Wars, E.T. the Extraterrestrial, Toy Story 3, The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King and The Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers. It became the seventh Warner Brothers film to earn over $300 million in the US and Canada and the 50th film to reach the mark. It earned as much as the combined earnings of all of the other 2014 Best Picture nominees. 49 On March 8, 2015, it surpassed The Hunger Games, Mockingjay, Part 1 to become the highest-grossing film of 2014, making it the first R-rated film since Saving Private Ryan, 1998, and the first non-franchise film since Avatar, 2009, to top the year-end rankings. American Sniper premiered at the AFI Fest on November 11, 2014, just after a screening of Selma at Grauman's Egyptian Theater in Los Angeles. In North America, the film opened to a limited release on December 25, 2014, playing at 4 theaters, 2 in New York, 1 in Los Angeles, and 1 in Dallas, and earned $610,000 in its opening weekend, $850,000 including Christmas Day, at an average of $152,500 per venue, debuting at number 22. The following week the film earned $676,909 playing at the same number of locations at an average of $169,277 per theater, which is the second biggest weekend average ever for a live-action movie, previously held by 2001's Moulin Rouge. American Sniper holds the record for the most entries in the top 20 top weekend theater averages with 3 entries, at number 12, number 14, and number 17. It earned a total of $3.4 million from limited release in 3 weekends. The film began its wide debut across North American theaters on January 16, 2015, Thursday night showings began at 7 p.m. It set an all-time highest Thursday night opening record for an R-rated drama with $5.3 million, previously held by Lone Survivor. The film topped the box office on its opening day, grossing $30.5 million, including Thursday previews, from 3,555 theaters, setting January records for both biggest debut opening, previously held by Cloverfield, and single-day gross, previously held by Avatar. In its traditional 3-day opening the film earned $89.2 million, which was double than expected and broke the record for the largest January opening, previously held by Ride Along, and the largest winter opening, which is also Eastwood's top opening as a director, breaking Gran Torino's opening. The 3-day opening is also the biggest opening weekend for a drama film, previously held by The Passion of the Christ, the second biggest debut for a Best Picture Oscar nominee, behind Toy Story 3, the second biggest debut for an R-rated film, behind The Matrix Reloaded, and the third biggest for a non-comic book, non-fantasy/sci-fi film, behind Furious 7 and Fast and Furious 6. It also set an IMAX January opening and single weekend record with $10.6 million, previously held by Avatar in its 4th weekend, and an R-rated IMAX debut record, previously held by Prometheus. It earned $107.2 million during its 4-day Martin Luther King weekend, setting a record for the biggest R-rated 4-day gross. In its 2nd weekend, the film expanded to 3,705 theaters, making it the 2nd widest launch for an R-rated movie, behind the film itself. It grossed an estimated $64.6 million in its 2nd weekend, declining only by 28% and set the record for the second best hold ever for a movie opening to more than $85 million and also set the record for the 8th largest second weekend gross. In just 10 days of release, the film surpassed Pearl Harbor, $198.5 million, to become the second highest grossing war film in North America. By its second weekend, Box Office Mojo had already reported that the film was on poise to become the highest grossing film of 2014 in North America, a record that was, at the time, held by The Hunger Games, Mockingjay, Part 1, $334 million. Judging from its gradual decline and strong holdovers. It became the highest grossing IMAX film of January, grossing $18.8 million from 333 IMAX theaters. On Thursday, January 29, 2015, 35 days after its initial release, the film surpassed Saving Private Ryan, $216.5 million, to become the highest grossing war film in North America, unadjusted for inflation. By its third weekend of wide release, the film expanded to 3,885 theaters, 180 additional theaters added, breaking its own record of being the widest R-rated film ever released. The film topped the box office through its third weekend, earning $30.66 million, which is the second highest Super Bowl weekend gross, behind Hannah Montana and Miley Cyrus' Best of Both Worlds concert. After topping the box office for 3 consecutive weekends, the film was overtaken by the SpongeBob movie, Sponge Out of Water, in its fourth weekend. The film had the biggest debut weekend for a Clint Eastwood film, and went on to become the director's top-grossing film of all time in each of the countries in which it was released. In Italy, the film opened at number 2 with $7.1 million, Eastwood's best opening of all time, and Warner Brothers' second biggest opening for a non-franchise US film there. It went on to top the box office the following weekend as well. Its other largest openings occurred in France, $6.3 million, where it topped the box office for 4 consecutive weekends, Australia, $4.3 million, $4.6 million including previews, the UK, Ireland, and Malta, $3.8 million, Spain, $3.2 million, Japan, $2.8 million, Mexico, $2.6 million, Brazil, $1.8 million, and South Korea, $1.2 million. In total earnings, its largest market outside of the US are Italy, $23 million, and France, $22.8 million. On Rotten Tomatoes, American Sniper holds an approval rating of 72%, based on 299 reviews, with an average rating of 6.90/10. The website's critical consensus states, powered by Clint Eastwood's sure-handed direction and a gripping central performance from Bradley Cooper, American Sniper delivers a tense, vivid tribute to its real-life subject. On Metacritic, the film has a weighted average score of 73 out of 100, based on 48 critics, indicating generally favorable reviews. In CinemaScore polls conducted during the opening weekend, audiences gave American Sniper a rare grade of A+ on an A+ to F scale. Todd McCarthy of The Hollywood Reporter called the film a taut, vivid, and sad account of the brief life of the most accomplished marksman in American military annals. Justin Chang of Variety gave the film a positive review, saying, "An excellent performance from a bulked-up Bradley Cooper. This harrowing and intimate character study offers fairly blunt insights into the physical and psychological toll exacted on the front lines." David Denby of The New Yorker gave the film a positive review, saying both a devastating war movie and a devastating anti-war movie, a subdued celebration of a warrior's skill and a sorrowful lament over his alienation and misery. Keith Phipps of The Dissolve wrote that the film, while well made, missed a chance to explore the toll that such service exacts on soldiers. Chris Nashawati of Entertainment Weekly gave the film a C+, saying the film's just a repetition of context-free combat missions and one-dimensional targets. Elizabeth Weitzman of New York Daily News gave the film 4 out of 5 stars, saying the best movies are ever shifting, intelligent, and open-hearted enough to expand alongside an audience. American Sniper is built on this foundation of uncommon compassion. Peter Travers of Rolling Stone gave the film 3.5 stars out of 4, saying Bradley Cooper, as Navy SEAL Chris Kyle, and director Eastwood salute Kyle's patriotism best by not denying its toll. Their targets are clearly in sight, and their aim is true. Ignatiy Vishnevetsky of the AV Club gave the film a B, saying American Sniper is imperfect and at times a little corny, but also ambivalent and complicated in ways that are uniquely Eastwoodian. James Berardinelli of Real Views gave the film 3.5 stars out of 4, saying American Sniper lifts director Clint Eastwood out of the doldrums that have plagued his last few films. Rafer Guzman of Newsday gave the film 3 out of 4 stars, saying Cooper nails the role of an American killing machine in Clint Eastwood's clear-eyed look at the Iraq War. Kenneth Turan of the Los Angeles Times gave the film a positive review, saying Eastwood's impeccably crafted action sequences so catch us up in the chaos of combat we are almost not aware that we're watching a film at all. Claudia Poog of USA Today gave the film 3 out of 4 stars, saying it's clearly Cooper's show. Substantially bulked up and affecting a believable Texas drawl, Cooper embodies Kyle's confidence, intensity, and vulnerability. Joshua Rothkopf of Time Out New York gave the film 4 out of 5 stars, saying only Clint Eastwood could make a movie about an Iraq War veteran and infuse it with doubts, mission anxiety, and ruination. Dean Abdallah praised the film, saying his focus was not on whom we were fighting, but the unbearably high price Americans pay for waging war regardless of its target. The film is a cautionary tale for Americans about why we must avoid war. It is not a celebration of waging it. The film drew some negative reviews. Matt Taibbi, in Rolling Stone, wrote that the movie turned the complicated moral questions and mass bloodshed of the Iraq War into a black and white fairy tale, without presenting the historical context. Alex von Tunzelmann of The Guardian argued that the film presented a simplified black and white portrayal of the Iraq War, and that it features the distortion of facts into unreliable myths based upon previous legends. David Massiatra of Salon criticized the movie's focus on physical rather than moral courage as the ultimate manly virtue. Cavalry Scout sniper Garrett Reppenhagen stated that he did not view Iraqi civilians as savages, but as part of a friendly culture for which the movie has furthered ignorance, fear, and bigotry. Inku Kong of The Wrap gave the film a negative review, saying director Clint Eastwood's focus on Kyle is so tight that no other character, including wife Tayat, Sienna Miller, comes through as a person, and the scope so narrow that the film engages only superficially with the many moral issues surrounding the Iraq War. Several other articles have also been critical of the movie. Responding to critics, Eastwood said that American Sniper shows what war does to the people left behind, and that presenting the fact of what war does to the family and the people who have to go back into civilian life like Chris Kyle did is the biggest anti-war statement any film can make. 116 He stated, "One of my favorite war movies that I've been involved with is Letters from Iwo Jima, and that was about family, about being taken away from life, being sent someplace. In World War II, everybody just sort of went home and got over it. Now there is some effort to help people through it." He also said, "I was a child growing up during World War II. That was supposed to be the one to end all wars. And 4 years later, I was standing at the draft board being drafted during the Korean conflict, and then after that there was Vietnam, and it goes on and on forever. I just wonder, does this ever stop? And no, it doesn't. So each time we get in these conflicts, it deserves a lot of thought before we go wading in or wading out. Going in or coming out. It needs a better thought process, I think." Bradley Cooper stated that much of the criticism ignores that the film was about widespread neglect of returning veterans, and that people who take issue with Kyle should redirect their attention to the leaders who put the troops there in the first place. He said, "We looked at hopefully igniting attention about the lack of care that goes to vets. Any discussion that has nothing to do with vets, or what we did or did not do for them, every conversation in those terms is moving farther and farther from what our soldiers go through, and the fact that 22 veterans commit suicide each day. Cooper said that an increasing number of soldiers are returning from conflict psychologically damaged, only to be more or less discarded. Former First Lady Michelle Obama and former Republican Party vice presidential nominee Sarah Palin also spoke out in support of the movie. Several major news sources commented on the accuracy of the film and how it differs from Chris Kyle's written accounts. The enemy sniper Mustafa is a major character in the film but receives only a small mention in the memoir. Kyle noted, "I never saw him, but other snipers later killed an Iraqi sniper we think was him." According to the memoir, Kyle's 2,100-yard shot was taken against an insurgent holding a rocket launcher, not Mustafa. Time notes that according to screenwriter Jason Hall, Kyle said of Mustafa, "He shot my friend. I'm not going to put his name in my book." The first combat scene in the film has Kyle killing a boy and mother who try to attack US troops with a grenade. The boy was added for the film. The film's narrative has Navy SEAL Ryan Biggles' job dying from surgical complications from an operation on his face relatively soon after being shot in Iraq, but in reality it was several years later. The character the Butcher was created for the film, although this character may have been based on the real-life Abu Dirat or Ahmed Hashim Abd al-Isa'i. The visual blog Information is Beautiful stated that, while taking creative license into account, the film was 56.9% accurate when compared to real-life events, summarizing, "A lot of the events in the movie did happen, although Kyle's involvement in them was repeatedly exaggerated." In the film, Kyle decides to join the Navy after watching the 1998 United States Embassy bombings on TV. In reality, this did not contribute to his decision. One aspect of the film that received negative comment was its use of a fake baby doll in one scene, which was said to look obviously artificial and distracting to critics and audiences. In at least one media screening of the film, the audience laughed out loud at how artificial the doll appeared. When discussing the film's prospects for winning an Academy Award, Fandango critic Dave Karger said, "The reason why American Sniper is not going to win is because of the plastic baby." In the Telegraph, journalist Mark Harris said, "That plastic baby is going to be rationalized by Eastwood auteur cultists until the end of days." In response, screenwriter Jason Hall replied, "Hate to ruin the fun but Real Baby number 1 showed up with a fever. Real Baby number 2 was no show. Gimme the doll, kid. You wouldn't necessarily know it by looking at him. He's not 8 feet tall or covered in jangling metals, just a burly OL cowboy with a baseball cap and Texas drawl. But put him behind a sniper rifle, and Chris Kyle is war-torn Iraq's own avenging angel, a hand of judgment laid heavy on the enemy. With a perch on a rooftop and a finger on a trigger, he wields the power of life and death. A man runs into the street with a grenade, threatening the American troops below. Crack. Thump. A small spray of blood and one life is gone while others are saved. It's harsh work, but no one does it better." The real-life Chris Kyle racked up more than 160 confirmed kills and probably hundreds more. He was so lethal that insurgents slapped an $80,000 bounty on his head and dubbed him the Devil of Ramadai. Not that Chris was fazed by their threats, he signed up for 4 tours of duty and seemed, at times, invulnerable. He thrived in those Iraqi deserts, at home in the heat. But in this movie from Clint Eastwood, it was home that felt dangerous to Chris. It was home that was dangerous. Much of the story is pulled from Chris Kyle's autobiography, and it does little to dispel the fact that many would consider Kyle an unalloyed American hero. Chris' father tells him that there are 3 types of people in the world: sheep, wolves, and sheepdogs. And when Chris beats up a bully who was hitting his little brother Jeff, Dad, instead of punishing him for fighting, simply says, "Well, then you know who you are. You know your purpose." This is not to condone fighting at school, of course. but it does illustrate why Chris sees himself as that sheepdog, protecting American military personnel from the wolves all around him. He's not conflicted about his job, nor does he wring his hands over his marks. He has a clarity of purpose unusual in this navel-gazing age of ours. His job is to fight evil, he believes, and that evil is embodied in the terrorists he guns down. It's a shame these people picked up weapons to attack, he thinks. But now that they have, he has no question about what his role needs to be. Chris' clarity of purpose is so crystal clear, in fact, that it makes it hard for him to go home. He feels that if he's not in Iraq, Americans are dying needlessly. The sheepdog in him won't stop patrolling, even as his wife, Taya, tells him that she and his kids could sure use some protection and companionship too. Eventually a counselor tells him that his sheepdog days aren't necessarily over just because his tours of duty are. He encourages Chris to help other soldiers and sailors, now stateside and struggling to adapt. Chris throws himself into this new arena, serving as a mentor to many. And he becomes a laudable husband and father to boot. Chris seems to be a sincere, if less than reflective, Christian. He says he believes in God, country, family, and insists that he could stand before the Creator and answer for every shot I took. A huge Crusader cross is tattooed on one of his arms, and he carries a Bible with him wherever he goes. But Chris stole that Bible from a church pew as a kid, and one of his fellow Navy SEALs tells Chris that he's never seen him actually open the book up. This SEAL wants to be a pastor when he returns from the war and struggles with the morality of what they're doing in Iraq. The insurgents have their own faith, of course, though we don't see much of it. Chris and his cotter confront and question an Islamic cleric. A pastor recites verses from Acts that relate to spiritual judgment. Before he joined the Navy, Chris was a rodeo cowboy, and he hopes that his latest buckle, a traditional trophy given to cowboys for winning an event, will get him laid by his girlfriend. But then he and his brother discover Chris' girlfriend with another man, both hurriedly dressing. Chris later picks up his eventual wife at a bar, after she rejects another guy who hits on her. Though she tries to keep Chris at arm's length for a time, the two eventually kiss, then sleep together. We see them in bed together nude under the sheets, her in bra and panties, her wrapping her legs around him as he carries her, and her running her foot up his leg to his crotch. Several times they coyly flirt around with sexual topics. Married, when Chris comes home from a tour, he and his wife awkwardly begin making moves again to become intimate, a tricky thing, considering how long they've been apart. Someone removes his ring when trying to score at a bar. There are one-off jokes about incest, masturbation, oral sex, anatomical sizes, and talking dirty on the phone. The F word is used several times in a sexual context, among other sexually provocative and descriptive words. Chris and his hand-picked team try to take down a radical nicknamed the Butcher, and his moniker seems well picked. In perhaps the movie's most horrific scene, the Butcher drags a little boy out into the street. The grandson of a cleric who gave Chris team information takes an electric drill and drives the bit into the boy's leg. Then, when the cleric makes a move to rescue the lad, he's gunned down as the Butcher drills through the boy's head, leaving him dead in a pool of blood as he shouts out warnings to onlookers. The scene is not filmed from a close-up point of view, but the suggestion it gives us is terrifying. Later, when Chris closes in on the Butcher, we go into his lair, a supposed restaurant where body parts, including decapitated heads, are stored. One dead, bloody body, presumably someone tortured to death, hangs from chains. In contrast, Chris' own work is practically sterile. Most of his kills, and we see many of them, are accomplished quickly and cleanly, accompanied by a small splash of blood. But his work has its own share of horrors. His first mark is a boy about 12 years old. The kid's mother gave him a grenade to throw at an advancing squadron of American military. Chris shoots him once. And when the mom picks up the grenade to hurl it herself, Chris puts her down, too. He nearly has to shoot another child who picks up a weapon and aims it at an American column. The SEAL holds his fire long enough for the boy to finally drop the weapon and run away. Other kills are shown, of course, along with casualties on the American side of things. One SEAL is shot in the head, the bullet mangling much of his face. Another, suffering a similar wound, bleeds out. Protracted firefights and grenade attacks produce high body counts. We see a vehicle drive over a dead body. Back home, when a dog wrestles with a little boy at a backyard party, Chris thinks it's attacking. He runs over, pins the dog with his hand and pulls off his belt, preparing to beat the beast. Chris shoots a rattlesnake during training. He puts someone in a headlock. People are pushed around and to the ground. Kids on a playground beat each other bloody. At a stateside bar, one macho military guy becomes an impromptu dartboard. With a bullseye on his back, he stands still as his friends throw darts into him. Several hang in the skin on his back. Chris and his brother drink lots of beer. Chris and his SEAL friends pour and drink champagne after Chris' wedding, and many quaff beer as well. When Chris first meets Taya at a bar, she's already had a drink or two, and he engages her in a contest involving shots. By the time she staggers out, she's so drunk she throws up. Chris holds up her hair so it doesn't get covered in vomit. Special Forces vehicles and gear are sometimes emblazoned with the skull of the Punisher, a gun-brandishing Marvel superhero. You don't become a world-class sniper without a laser-like focus on what's in front of you. American Sniper suggests that Chris retained that sniper's clarity and fixation throughout his life. While his comrades may ruminate on the war's purpose and morality, Chris simply concentrates on his job. As others wonder about what might have been, Chris focuses on what is. Chris suggests there's no point in looking back. Those wrong picks put you here, he tells her. Made you who you are. If we were able to see American Sniper through Chris' own laser sight eyes, we'd be able to easily reduce it down to its many positives, its heroism and sacrifice, and strong sense of duty and family. But movies aren't meant to be viewed through a scope. They require you to look at everything around you. So the story we're given here is more complex than Chris would deem it, and more problematic. It's filled with extreme, sometimes sadistic violence presented to illustrate a point, but they're nevertheless. And it's crammed with colorful language, read, lots of F-words, that accurately reflects the way these men surely talked, but they're nevertheless. American Sniper is about more than one man's heroism in the midst of war. It's about the high cost of that war on those involved, and it asks, demands, that we too feel and see, if not quite experience, that cost. American Sniper is an extremely well-made, powerful, tragic movie. However, it has too much intense, extreme content for media-wise viewers, despite its definite patriotic, emotional appeal. As a young boy in Texas, Chris, his father, brother, and mother go to church and believe the gospel. His father says there are 3 types of people: sheep, wolves, and sheepdogs, and his father wants his sons to be sheepdogs who protect the sheep. From his early youth, Chris is an excellent marksman. He's also becomes a rough and tumble rodeo rider. His brother is his sidekick. After one rodeo, Chris comes back to his apartment to find his girlfriend is with another guy. He throws her out after throwing the guy out and then goes to a bar to get drunk. There, he picks up the girl who will become his wife. When a crisis happens in the Middle East, Chris joins the Navy SEALs. An expert marksman, he becomes a legend. He shoots men, women, and children who are trying to kill the Americans and the local allies. On the other side of the battle are the Muslims jihadists who are cruel and vicious. One is called the Butcher. He uses a drill to torture people and saves body parts on shelves. Chris is given the mission to get rid of the Butcher. However, the Butcher has a protector who's an expert gold medalist sniper in his own right. Meanwhile, Chris's wife has 2 children at home, but each trip home after a tour of duty, he becomes more and more alienated. Eventually, after killing the Butcher and the sniper, he's ready to return home, but he's not the man who left home. A psychiatrist helps Chris to deal with his extreme psychological pain by helping others. Since this is a true story, many people will know this ended up as a tragedy. American Sniper is in many ways one of the best contemporary movies about the conflicts in the Middle East. It is full of strong Christian faith, self-sacrifice, valor, and patriotism. It is endlessly captivating and full of jeopardy, which keeps you riveted to your seat. Clint Eastwood has done a magnificent job directing this movie. That said, after countless killings, even the audience may become war-weary, and some of the minor characters who lose faith and courage will resonate with some audience members. American Sniper is not an easy movie for sensitive viewers. Chris Kyle, the subject of Clint Eastwood's American Sniper, is by official standards the most lethal sniper in U.S. military history. He has over 150 confirmed kills to prove it, and to both the film and the man himself, that's all these seem to be kills. Faceless, nameless, inhuman figures, proverbial tally marks on his rifle that seem to serve as our indicator of what a hero he is. As a genre about mass-scale violence and trauma, war movies are almost unavoidably teeming with bloodshed and an array of other unpleasant rise, but what gives the genre its profundity and its raison d'etre is how the turmoil can facilitate psychologically and emotionally insightful and compelling ideas. If a war film fails to reach these depths of insight, then it might at least appeal to the inner savage in all of us, that carnal desire to revel in cinematic violence, symphonies of bullets, the aesthetic delights of gunplay and explosions. But what happens when a war film has the macabre qualities necessary for the genre without any of the catharsis or entertainment value? We get something along the lines of American Sniper, a film whose emotional core is built on such a phony facade, and whose action scenes are so familiar and incessant that it feels closer to propaganda or video game cutscene filler than the powerful and inspiring film that it allegedly is. American Sniper is composed of two narrative halves that flip back and forth in orderly fashion: Chris Kyle's life at home with his wife, and his 4 tours of duty in the Middle East. Except, there's a surprisingly dark bit of childhood backstory to start the film and then never re-emerge, and in reality, the war halves comprise the vast majority of the film, leaving what little remains feeling undernourished and, like the first section, essentially unnecessary. Chris Kyle is a Texas cowboy with an affinity for target shooting and a deep-seated sense of patriotism that is ignited the instant he sees the World Trade Center's collapse on the TV news. He meets a pretty girl at a bar, wins her over, takes her home, and then marries her, whether out of love or because of her pregnancy. That's really all we know about him, because during the time-hogging war scenes, he exudes only the type of battle buddy chatter and surface-level distress that one expects from every single war film in existence. The politics and particulars of his military operations are kept simple, which prevents any potential confusion stemming from too many proper nouns being thrown around, but also omits any sense of reality, weight, or sense of purpose here. It never feels like a film about an American out to do a necessary evil in protecting the citizens of his country against a clever and motivated enemy, as much as the film tries to convince us of that, and as much as Kyle himself truly believed that. It just feels like cowboys and Indians in the Middle East, or cops and robbers, or some other childish game of absolute good and absolute evil without the slightest admittance that war is never so simple. As the film progresses and Kyle's service rolls on and on, we expect it to take a toll, and to an extent, it does. His absence is an emotional burden on his wife and children, one of whom is a plastic doll, apparently, and his time home is marred by constant paranoia and disconnect from tranquil life, but the film refuses to acknowledge these as the serious, troubling signs that they are. Kyle's constant return to active military duty is obviously problematic and indicative of psychological distress, but Eastwood seems to wholeheartedly embrace Kyle's ignorant beliefs that what he's doing is a heroic and essential endeavor, one that he is specifically responsible for. His wife, written as a classic female non-character, begs him to stay, telling him that he's failing as a father and a husband, and that his real duty is to be there for them, not risking his life in faraway places for less than scrupulous causes. As right as she is, the film just sort of ignores all of the implications of abandonment here, jumping back into run-of-the-mill, dime-a-dozen battle scenes before the characters actually have a chance to behave like human beings. Bradley Cooper as Kyle is the only actor actually given a chance to act here, and he performs pretty much competently, for what he was given to work with. That the film is seen almost exclusively from his perspective is understandable, but that each and every Arab savage, as the soldiers casually denote them, is either a hysterical nuisance or a hysterical terrorist perpetuates negative stereotypes in a fashion that could have been simply avoided had the film been willing to even acknowledge the existence of rational and innocent Iraqis, but no. Just as the home scenes are plagued by a lack of any sort of humanity, the film was too busy depicting how awful it was for poor Chris Kyle to shoot so many people, but how inspiring it is to witness, without really admitting their existence as individual persons, each as important and human as any American man, woman, child, or soldier. American Sniper fails to accomplish in 130 minutes what countless films have in 90. It's competently made, occasionally exciting, and never exactly boring, but it's totally devoid of anything that might render it legitimately worthwhile. The resolution is pathetic and utterly ignorant of the complex array of issues established throughout the film, and the brevity and nonchalant portrayal of the real-life story's heavy conclusion was almost laughable. The attempt to portray such a morally reprehensible man as a national hero is abhorrent in itself, but that Eastwood couldn't even tell an interesting lie of a story almost adds insult to injury. The film might as well have been called Call of Duty, the movie, because while less amusing than the video game, it certainly succeeded in capturing the series' notorious adherence to cliché, repetition, and total disregard for moral and historical truth. Last year I reviewed Lone Survivor and found it to be an offensively jingoistic piece of American military propaganda that disrespected most of the people who lost their lives in the real-life incident the movie depicted. As such, my expectations going into American Sniper really weren't that high. I also made a conscious effort not to research Chris Kyle or any of the reviews or word of mouth about the movie. For those unfamiliar with the plot of American Sniper, the movie is about Chris Kyle, Bradley Cooper, a Navy SEAL sniper credited with more than 160 confirmed kills. The movie, directed by Clint Eastwood, depicts Kyle's 4 tours in Iraq as well as his relationship with his wife, Sienna Miller, and the effects of war on his life stateside. American Sniper isn't as offensively jingoistic as Lone Survivor. But it also, unfortunately, isn't anything to write home about. The emotional through line of American Sniper is the toll the war takes on Kyle's psyche and how it affects his relationships. However, these moments are few and far between in a movie that is very poorly paced and lacks follow-through in its examination of its subject. The movie begins with a condensed look at Kyle's upbringing and how it molded him into being a sheepdog. This sequence is essential to the story Eastwood is telling, but the brevity of it left me wanting. The movie gives us cliff notes on his childhood and, despite the sequence's importance to the narrative, it felt poorly executed and established a pace that didn't fit with the rest of the movie. Once Kyle enlists and the relationship with his wife Sienna Miller, is established, the movie shifts its focus to the combat. In fact, given that Kyle spent 4 tours in Iraq, a majority of the movie depicts the hell he endured. The war sequences are shot well enough, but save for the final one, they are largely indistinctive when compared to the breadth of modern war movies depicting this particular region of conflict. However, I exclude the final sequence from that analysis for good reason. It helps the movie reach a level of intensity that ties back to the emotional story of Kyle and his wife in a particularly poignant way. Before the conflict, there's an impressive aerial shot that brings the audience into the sequence while making me wonder where Eastwood was hiding that flair and talent throughout the rest of the movie. That one impressive sequence stands alone, however, in a movie that strains its focus on a few different things at once. Eastwood creates a balancing act, spreading American Sniper into part biopic, part war movie, and part post-traumatic stress disorder awareness piece. He threads the narrative through these filters and the result is a movie that lacks focus. American Sniper failed to connect with me on nearly all fronts except for the scenes involving PTSD. There are several moments where Kyle is stateside between tours and encounters PTSD. Yet these moments, despite carrying the most emotional resonance, fail the rest of the movie by being infrequent and oftentimes dropped. In one scene Kyle runs into his brother, Keir O'Donnell, who is visibly shaken by what he's experienced in the war. Yet, there's no follow-up to this encounter. In fact, Kyle's brother isn't referenced at all after this scene. It's one of the strongest and best acted PTSD scenes of the entire movie, yet it's dropped and ignored after the scene ends. Bradley Cooper earned an Oscar nomination for his role as Chris Kyle in this movie, and I don't really understand why. The moments that should bring out the most emotion from Kyle are met with more subtlety than needed by Cooper. Moments where he reacts to a noise at home rely on audio cues than on any emotion Cooper gives us. Cooper's performance in the war sequences seem hampered by what I can only describe as the movie bending over itself to depict Kyle as humbling, stoic and generally heroic. By no means is that an indictment on Chris Kyle's character. However, the tone the movie hits with its depiction of Kyle feels hollow and, at times, disingenuous. Sienna Miller's performance falls victim to a script that carves her character into little more than a plot device. In an Oscar season rife with controversy over a lack of diversity in its nominees, Miller's performance as Taya reinforces the fact that strong female roles are hard to come by. Taya is the sounding board for military wives struggling to comprehend what drives their spouses to return to a war zone. Yet, throughout the movie's entirety there's a noticeable disconnect in Miller's performance. Taya isn't a fully realized character because she's solely reactionary to Kyle's story. The scene where they first meet in a bar is the only instance where Taya is given any substance and, much like Keir O'Donnell's role later, it's ultimately abandoned. Even though Taya and Kyle's relationship hits an emotional climax in the climactic war scene, there's a scene midway through the movie where Taya listens as Kyle is in the midst of an intense battle. Here Eastwood chooses to intercut the war scene with reaction shots of Miller's horrified reactions. The effect is nearly laughable because the two scenes could not fit together less. Jumping back and forth severely hampers the tension and shines a spotlight on the utter lack of material Miller has to work with throughout American Sniper. Eastwood handles the end of Chris Kyle's story in as respectful a manner as possible. However, given that PTSD played such an integral part in Kyle's life and the lives of people around him, I can't help but feel the effects of PTSD should have been front and center in American Sniper. It's touched on throughout the movie, but it's ultimately secondary to the story, and at times glorification, of Chris Kyle. In the end it feels like a squandered opportunity to say something substantial about something that affects so many people. American Sniper failed to connect with me on a variety of levels. This was mostly due to the fact that it presents multiple layers to its story without fully realizing any of them. Clint Eastwood's latest movie is victimized by a distinct lack of focus. It's ultimately a perfectly mediocre modern war movie that became just a little too wrapped up in itself to become anything worthwhile. During an early scene in director Clint Eastwood's American Sniper, Chris Kyle's father tells his preteen sons that there are three kinds of people in this world: sheep, wolves, and sheepdogs. With a noble expression on his young face, the boy version of the US military's most accomplished sniper accepts his lot in life to become a sheepdog, a protector, and in turn, saddles himself with a grave responsibility. Decades later, high above on the rooftops of Fallujah and Ramada hot zones, Kyle rested his rifle on a steady base and peered through his scope for insurgent targets. He was credited with 160 confirmed kills over 4 tours of duty, an unprecedented record. Played by Bradley Cooper, Kyle's status becomes mythic, shifting from a cowboy to a patriot, and in time earning the nickname The Legend among his fellow troops. And his representation on screen is just as exalting, since Eastwood has foregone the less dignified episodes of his subject's real life in favor of a romanticized portrait. He's humble and heroic, comparable to a modern-day Sergeant York. The film begins with Kyle sniping during the war and then flashes back to his childhood, where his father embeds life lessons about honor and rifle handling. As Kyle matures, he turns into a rootin' tootin', beer guzzlin', chaw spittin', rodeo ridin' Texan, but he quickly sets his cowboy aspirations aside after watching 9/11 footage on CNN. He enlists, trains to be a SEAL at 30, and gradually becomes a highly praised sniper. Meanwhile, Kyle meets Tayat, Sienna Miller, and falls in love. They marry, and she's pregnant by the time he begins a tour. Intercutting between Kyle's experience on the battlefield and Tayat at home alone, worrying, Eastwood creates a connection between the two and therein underlines how those removed from the conflict can easily criticize it. She remains in support of her husband, of course, but when he returns home between tours, she can see its toll on him, even if he refuses to acknowledge it. He remains calm and dignified, perhaps for Tayat's sake, though the effects of post-traumatic stress disorder have already begun to set in. In a subplot concocted for the film, Kyle and his fellow SEALs face off against a pair of merciless Al-Qaeda, a top man called the Butcher, Mito Hamada, and his sniper protector, Mustafa, Sami Sheikh, a former Olympic sharpshooter. Both Al-Qaeda characters are based on real people, but their direct opposition to Kyle has been arranged in service of the film's modern cowboy mentality. Kyle's very black and white worldview sees only good, America, and evil, Al-Qaeda, and so the film uses Mustafa as Kyle's villainous arch-nemesis. Eastwood and Hall use Mustafa to explain why Kyle keeps going back for additional tours, to finally get the guy who sniped so many of his SEAL comrades. Eastwood, whose long tradition of classical and revisionist westerns remains an impressive contribution to cinema, could not avoid turning American Sniper into something akin to an old-fashioned cowboy film. Kyle's need to get the bad guy is much more readily consumable than a complex, irresolvable discussion of how PTSD can actually result in a form of addiction for the thrills of wartime battle, thematically explored in The Hurt Locker. Glossing over Kyle's final return to the US and his minor celebrity status with several books and appearances on talk shows and reality TV, the screen story ends after a sudden prelude to Kyle's death. The screen fades to black and presents his ultimate fate in white titles. The final images of the film are sobering photos and video from Chris Kyle's actual memorial service at the Cowboys Stadium in Arlington, Texas, on February 11, 2013, and from his burial the next day. Eastwood's choice not to depict or attempt to explain Kyle's death retains his place in reverence, but viewers not already versed in the subject's life story will walk away with the sense that everything ended rather bluntly, and therefore this biopic feels incomplete. What happened to the man who killed Kyle, and why did he do it? Answering those questions may have led the film into too serious a discussion of PTSD, and that's not what American Sniper wants to be. It's much more interested in and effective as a two-dimensional tale of American heroes. In addition to saving countless lives through his sharpshooting as a Navy SEAL, in reality, Kyle made several curious claims, as noted in recent articles in Time and The Village Voice, to boost his legend, all of which blemish his otherwise pristine golden boy status. One such story, which officials later denied ever happened, involved Kyle getting carjacked. He supposedly shot the two perpetrators and the police let him off because he was the legend. Another of Kyle's stories claimed that Blackwater hired him to take out looters at the Superdome during Hurricane Katrina. And he told yet another story concerning former Minnesota Governor Jesse Ventura, resulting in a defamation lawsuit that was lost by Kyle's legal team. Jason Hall's script ignores these and other less glorifiable points in Kyle's life, leaving American Sniper more a carefully maneuvered reorganization and sometimes fabrication of the facts than a well-rounded biopic. It's all in service of a heroic war film that addresses larger issues, such as PTSD, from a safe distance. This is not to disparage Chris Kyle, mind you, but a film that acknowledges how our heroes are sometimes deeply flawed human beings is more convincing and admirable to this critic than one that refuses to address a particular hero's very human failings. Of the performances, it can only be said that Cooper and Miller pour their hearts out on screen. Miller gives her best turn yet as Kyle's concerned wife, who's forced to endure no end of worry and fear at home while her husband is in country. Cooper transforms into a singular presence, having gained impressive muscle mass for the role and adopted a quiet, honorable sensibility, not unlike Gary Cooper in Howard Hawks' film Sergeant York. Much of what makes this on-screen Kyle so sympathetic is what Bradley Cooper shows us through his vulnerable body language and eyes. He's putting on a hardened exterior and suppressing his fear and trauma beneath the surface, and we see evidence of this in Cooper's layered expressions. It's a complicated, outstanding performance in a film that's less interested in the psychological effects of war than the statistical outcome of Kyle's kill sheet. Indeed, with his frequent collaborator Tom Stern serving as cinematographer, Eastwood amps up the violence so it's exciting like an action film, yet gritty and thus more realistic, while the score, credited to several composers, of mostly tones and tempos serves to create a thrill ride type of experience. With his second film of 2014 after Jersey Boys, the 84-year-old Eastwood takes the easy way out with American Sniper, delivering a film that is both serviceable and respectful, yet would prefer to avoid any uncomfortable truths about its subject matter. The film is less about reality than creating a romantic hero, the equivalent of the mythic gunslinger. In that sense, it's a shrewdly constructed film that some might call classical. But our understanding of classicism correlates to the earliest established storytelling, which was driven by emotion and mythos, and known not for its representation of reality. This film of Chris Kyle's story is about myth-making, not authenticity. And while that approach is not by nature condemnable, the film is somewhat suspect because it's shot and presented in a realistic way. For reality, look elsewhere. Eastwood and Hall construct a very cinematic, romantic tale that leaves little to question, though reality, as always, is far more intricate and certainly not as black and white. As the saying goes, when the legend becomes fact, print the legend. Just as the Vietnam War inspired generations of films including Apocalypse Now, Platoon and Full Metal Jacket, so too has this millennium sojourns into Afghanistan and Iraq, with Jarhead, Green Room, and The Hurt Locker proved the same in recent times. The latest, American Sniper, based on the memoirs of Chris Kyle, credited as the deadliest marksman in U.S. military history, takes a slightly different, more personable take on events, but nonetheless brutally affecting, and which illustrates the emotional toll on U.S. forces both during and after the war. Assault of the Earth Texan native, Chris Kyle, Bradley Cooper, has ambitions to become a famous rodeo cowboy when he's compelled to sign up to the United States Navy, following the deadly bombings of the U.S. Embassy in Africa. His talents and superior concentration make him a prime candidate for sniper detail, with Kyle quickly recruited by the Navy's SEAL Special Operations Force. Shortly after meeting Taya Renee, Sienna Miller, whilst off duty, which blossoms into a relationship, Kyle witnesses the September 11th terrorist bombing in New York, and knows that he will soon be part of a retaliatory force. Sent to Iraq for his first tour of duty, Kyle earns his stripes in often ambiguous situations, with his eyes and reflexes responsible for protecting ground forces below. As the war becomes protracted and his tour of duties multiply, Kyle becomes more detached from Taya and his expanding family, haunted by the compatriots he's unable to save. Years spent overseas not only make it harder for him to readjust to civilian life, but also exponentially reduce his own chances of survival, both physically and mentally. The more cynical amongst us might call out American Sniper for being perfectly timed to capitalize on the height of Oscar season, the kudos of which can mean millions more in revenue, not to mention feeding the egos of Hollywood's elite, but without doubt the film deserves its short listing for Best Picture, if not the award itself. Whilst it might be dramatized and there's even suggestion that the events behind it might be a little fudged as well, this is a monumental effort of a compelling story, combining with authentic characterization and expert direction and staging. From a long career in front of the lens, Clint Eastwood has managed to carve out an equally impressive career behind the camera, with 2 Best Director Oscars, multiple nominations, and equal parts critical and financial success. American Sniper just might be his most dynamic film, not exactly what you expect from a director approaching 85 years of age. Bradley Cooper carries the majority of the weight on his shoulders, cutting an almost unrecognizable figure from the attractive playboy from American Hustler and an obvious departure from the wisecracks of the Hangover trilogy. Unfolding through his eyes, the film's focus remains unwaveringly on Kyle, despite the sizable cast of players, including the increasingly marginalized Sienna Miller and his SEAL colleagues including Luke Grimes and Max Charles. Mirroring the ever-present left-right divide of U.S. and international politics, much has been made of the film's portrayal of war, smearing it with a pro-war label and accusing the filmmakers of making Kyle's record kill streak into some ill-advised heroic badge of honor. I found this to be anything but. American Sniper is a monumental film which drives home the great sacrifices, including their own lives in the pursuit of justice and security, which fails to halt even after the war has directed by Clint Eastwood in what some may take as alarmingly short order following Jersey Boys, which was released only 6 months ago. For heaven's sake, American Sniper proves the dictum never count an auteur out by proving itself as Eastwood's strongest directorial effort since 2009's underrated. Invitu's pretty much right out of the starting gate. Opening with a brutally suspenseful moment of decision for its titular character, Chris Kyle, the movie establishes all of the things it's going to be about and the things it's not going to be about with plain but almost breathtaking assurance. Sniper is based on a true story that got more complicated after Kyle himself told it in the book that gives the film its title. Adapted from that book by actor-turned-screenwriter Jason Dean Hall, the story begins, after its Iraq set prologue, showing Kyle as first a boy and then a young man. A schoolyard bullying incident compels Kyle's father, Ben Reed, to give a scary dinner table fire and brimstone speech to Chris and younger brother Jeff about showing would-be tough guys whose boss, we protect our own. The weight of expectation seems to jam the two boys down, and in a flash forward to the boys as young men, they're leading the aimless lives of wannabe rodeo stars. That all changes when Chris decides to apply to join the Special Forces. The film depicts him doing so after seeing TV coverage of the 1998 attacks on U.S. embassies in Tanzania and Kenya. As he's developing a new sense of purpose while training, he also meets future wife Taya, Sienna Miller. Post 9/11, the war in Iraq puts Kyle to work as a sharpshooter, and the film depicts his skills in this area as almost eerie. They were so in real life, too. As it happens, Kyle racked up 160 confirmed kills, making him the deadliest such operative in U.S. Navy history. Eastwood's handling of various battle scenarios, including those in which Kyle is compelled to take down women and children, is typically anti-elaborate for the director. Grim, purposeful, compelling. Violence and its relation to both American history and the American character is one of Eastwood's great themes as both a filmmaker and a film actor. But he is not a director of an overly analytical or intellectualizing bent, and this turns out to be one of this movie's great strengths. It has nothing to say about whether the war in Iraq was a good or bad idea. It simply is, and Kyle is an actor in it, and he's also a devoted husband and father. But Kyle is more than just an actor in the war, he's a true believer in what he's doing, and his intensity in this respect bleeds into his relationships back at home in ways that can't help but be unsettling. When a fellow soldier is killed in a raid, Kyle returns to the U.S. to attend the funeral. At the graveside, a relative of the soldiers reads one of his last letters, expressing doubt and disappointment about the war. On the drive home, Chris avers to Taya that what killed his friend was that letter. Taya doesn't know how to respond, the viewer likely doesn't, either, or at least shouldn't. The role of Taya, well played by Sienna Miller, this and her turn in Foxcatcher represent a release from movie jail for the actress, could have been another stock complaining military wife in other hands. In this film, she's more complex. She clearly knows that the qualities she admires/loves in Kyle, his rigid loyalty and sharp focus, his determination to see his commitments through, are inextricable from his identity as a military operative. But even a warrior as devoted as Kyle can't escape being messed with by his mission. As the film continues, and the sniper's rep grows more fearsome, the nature of his accomplishments gets messy, and by the time the sniper has completed his tour, the viewer has good reason to be a little, or more than a little, frightened by the guy. But Taya is not. This puts the whole story on an oddly suspended note that, as it happens, is resolved by a real-life ending that's not very Hollywood. Star Bradley Cooper does some of his best acting ever here. Bulked up to make himself resemble, with respect to body shape, a large-scale 9-volt battery, Cooper suppresses the actorly knowingness he's brought to most of his prior screen roles and gives his character here a simultaneous credulousness and itch. He feels like a dangerous guy but not a malicious one. His lack of self-doubt never comes off as alienating in its steadfastness, even at moments when it seems like it's misplaced, as when Kyle finds out for the last time that he can't really be his brother's keeper. Moments such as that one, and they are strewn throughout the movie, are what make American Sniper one of the more tough-minded and effective war pictures of post-American century American cinema. Even after returning home from the war in Iraq, Chris Kyle, a SEAL sniper, cannot let go of the horrors he has experienced. This begins to affect his marriage and his life. Where to even begin with this horrendous piece of American militaristic propaganda? This film earned over $500 million at the box office and it was nominated for 6 Oscars. And those nominations were the big ones, including Best Actor, Best Picture, and Best Adapted Screenplay. Needless to say, it was a hugely renowned movie at the time. And that is where my biggest issue stems from. Hollywood would say that they are liberal, but they voted for this nationalistic movie from a conservative filmmaker. This just goes to show that when it comes to their foreign policy and interventionism, both liberals and conservatives are the same, very nationalistic. It's the perfect film to showcase just how dangerous America is to the rest of the world. Sienna Miller played a boring female love interest character and the Iraqi soldiers are depicted as villainous caricatures. Bradley Cooper's protagonist is the only one who got at least some sort of arc, but even his arc was all wrong. There is this intense moment in the film where he was humanized as he let the Iraqi child go. But in my opinion he was obviously intending to shoot the child and he was ready to do it, so I still found his character and everything that he represents appalling. Cooper did deliver a very good performance and is the only objectively positive aspect in this film, but it was not enough to save it, not by a long shot. There is another very questionable and downright horrifying moment later in the film where one character literally states that the Americans are the sheepdogs protecting the innocent from the wolves because they are endowed with aggressiveness. This is the most apparent and unambiguous admittance of their imperialistic and racist attitudes when it comes to foreign policy, and it was truly shocking to see it spelled out so bluntly. Clint Eastwood is usually a great filmmaker, but here he succumbed to his worst tendencies, making the most American film in his career and the one that nobody outside of the US can really appreciate. In fact, I cannot ever imagine anyone outside this country liking this film, as it represents to us all just how wrong their foreign policy is. The technical aspects here are solid, especially the sound and the execution of action scenes, but the movie is overlong, and even discarding the nationalism on display and the horrendous story and messaging, the film would be very tedious and overly familiar regardless. Bradley Cooper himself answered to the criticism directed toward the film's messaging, and he stated that those of us who criticize it missed the point. The point, according to him, is that we should all care more for these soldiers who go through the horrors of war and return home with PTSD. This is fine and all, but am I supposed to care about these soldiers who themselves chose their profession more than the innocent people and children who die in these wars? That is the takeaway here, and it just goes to show that Americans will put their people first and foremost every single time. Nobody put them in this position to fight the wars on everybody's behalf. They themselves chose to act this way due to their undeniable military might, which makes them the aggressive side. Hopefully, we will live to see the day when their military supremacy and interventionism end. Remember what I said about my opinion on biopics that I shared during my review of Confessions of a Dangerous Mind? If you don't, then let me remind you, I said that I will simply judge them as movies and not how accurate it is to the real-life event. And now you will keep that in mind while I review this biopic. In this movie we follow Navy SEAL sniper Chris Kyle, Bradley Cooper. Like I just said, he is a sniper for the Navy SEALs, a pretty damn good sniper for them. And we get to follow him as he goes on tours to Iraq to take out terrorists, but we also get to see parts of his civilian life with his wife Sienna Miller. Now the plot for the movie was pretty good. I didn't love it like a lot of other people, and I will explain why. Of course it is interesting to see him go to Iraq and see him shoot the terrorists over there, those parts are really interesting. And it is interesting-ish, to see how he handles family life. However, I felt like the plot was kind of thin. One thing that would have made it more interesting, and even the movie touched ever so slightly. And that is how Kyle gets PTSD. We get hints at it in the movie, but it is never fully explored, which is a shame because it would have made the plot that much more interesting. While the plot wasn't bad, it wasn't that great either. Bradley Cooper was fantastic in this movie. He gave a very nuanced and subdued performance. I have been impressed with some of his later films in recent years. He has really become a terrific actor. I honestly thought all performances in the movie were good. Sienna Miller was also really good. But, despite the performances in this movie being really good, none of the characters were interesting at all. Okay, Chris Kyle was of course really interesting and his wife was fairly interesting, but everyone else were basically like plastic lawn chairs, they filled the space but did nothing more. One thing that was really interesting about the music in American Sniper is that there barely is any. To be honest, there were only really 3 tracks in the entire movie. And before you start thinking that said 3 tracks would be used to death, they weren't. They were used at about 1 point each. One is Van Morrison's Someone Like You that is used during Chris and Taya's wedding. The second one is Call Taya's theme and was done by Clint Eastwood. And the third one is the Ennio Morricone classic The Funeral. And really, I had no problems with the short and rarely used soundtrack. It gave scenes so much more than if they had music simply because the studio said you have to have music there. I know I haven't sounded like the most positive guy so far in the review, so let's give some praise. This movie looks fucking fantastic. But this is something that was really obvious to me, since even though Clint Eastwood has made some not very good movies lately, they have still been really well directed. Clint Eastwood is a masterclass director and he shows it here with how he handles the camera work. And the action scenes in this movie are really intense. Whenever a scene that involved shooting in this movie, my heart was pounding, and that is not something that is easy to achieve. The scenes had intensity and they hit hard and really elevated this movie to a whole different level. Also, did you guys also notice the fake baby? It was pretty fucking weird. Just sitting there like a brick in Bradley Cooper's arms. This movie was really well received among people and critics alike. On Rotten Tomatoes it has a 72% positive rating with a fresh certification. On Metacritic it has a score of 72/100. And on imdb.com it has a score of 7,4/10. The movie also won 1 Oscar in the category of Best Sound Editing. It was also nominated for an additional 5 Oscars in the categories of Best Picture, Best Actor, Cooper, Best Adapted Screenplay, Best Film Editing and Best Sound Mixing. American Sniper is a mixed bag. On one hand it features a fantastic lead performance from Bradley Cooper, good use of music, excellent and suspenseful sniping/shooting scenes and some fantastic direction from Clint Eastwood. However, it is brought down a bit by a fairly thin plot and not having that many interesting characters. Time for my final score. Jeff. Envelope. Thank you. Bullet hits Jeff. Welp, he got sniped. My final score for American Sniper is an 8,62/10. It is worth buying. It seems irresponsible to review American Sniper without doing so through the lens of the enormous cultural conversation surrounding it, but having actually seen the damn movie, it strikes me as rather bizarre that so many tens of thousands of words have already been spent discussing it without most of them being, accurate. Given the parameters of the dialogue around the movie being so divorced from what seems to me to be its reality, I don't even know how to engage with that dialogue. So sadly, I'm just going to have to treat this like a movie that happened to come out, that I happened to see, and we'll all have to pretend that it hasn't already been buried under a mountain of essays from all corners of the political spectrum. So, American Sniper, Clint Eastwood's most thought-through, well-mounted, and thematically snug movie since Letters from Iwo Jima, centered on what is far and away the most subtle, insightful, and nuanced performance that Bradley Cooper has ever given. Indeed, I can't think of an Eastwood film since The Bridges of Madison County which so successfully foregrounds an actor and banks everything else on that actor's performance doing work that would be impossible if the film tried to approach it any other way. For American Sniper is, first and above all, about a man who wants to turn himself into a machine, a man born into a value system in a nation at a time where his sense of right demands that he give up a certain measure of his humanity for the greater good, and it resides entirely upon Cooper's performance to communicate what that entails. That, and one scene where Jason Hall's screenplay drops a broad-ass line to the effect of "Aren't you even human anymore?" into the mouth of the main character's wife, but by Eastwood movie standards, that's almost inscrutably subtle. The film is adapted from the memoirs of Chris Kyle, self-aggrandizing most lethal sniper in U.S. military history, though the filmmakers are content to reconfigure him as necessary to make the movie they want to. It's impossible to fathom Cooper's version of Kyle bragging in print about slugging Jesse Ventura, or whatever the hell it was, when he's praised as the legend, or reminded of his career kill count. He adopts a pleasant but blank expression that communicates "That's so nice of you, and can we maybe talk about anything else?" with the silent pleading of a man who's much better at avoiding talking about things than acknowledging them. It's the cousin to the expression he wears when his stateside wife, Sienna Miller, talks about how much she and their kids just love it when he's home, the facial vocabulary of a man who doesn't like feeling emotions and thinking about himself, and found that transforming himself into a military killing machine facilitated that non-feeling. The real-life Kyle has, in other words, been retrofitted into a perfect Eastwood protagonist, the clearest of all descendants from Will Money in the director's 1992 western Unforgiven. He even delivers the Money-esque line, "It's a heck of a thing to stop a beating heart," when taking his son out deer hunting, late in the film, delivered without Money's world-weary fatigue. For that would require introspection, and introspection is something Kyle is thoroughly incapable of performing. American Sniper illustrates Kyle's mind by fully settling into his warrior POV, which doesn't require or imply that it adopts his opinions as its own, but I've resigned myself to waiting until 2025 or so to start that fight, which to begin with, results in a pretty ingenious structure for a pretty conventional biopic. The opening 20 or 25 minutes start with the future deadliest of all possible snipers about to pull the trigger on his first human victim, and then flashing back to race through a potted history of his life prior to the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks, glancing at the big obvious signpost moments like "It can't wait to get back to Fallujah, Iraq." It then spends time meandering through his 4 separate tours in country, with Eastwood's characteristic bleached-out cinematography, courtesy of his regular DP Tom Stern, serving as it customarily does to strip all of the sentiment out of a scenario that barely had any to begin with. When Kyle goes home, he spends just enough time with his wife for her to just barely make an impression on us. I have never, ever had much use for Miller before, but the particular impact she makes is so profound with so little screen time that I'm not likely to doubt her again in the near future, and he's always back for another tour without a scene depicting his decision or his attempt to sell Taya on its merits. In short, the story won't engage with interpersonal conflict, it blasts through all of the explanatory history that might give us some insight into the protagonist, and it ignores everything in its haste to get back to war. And that is what I mean by settling into Kyle's POV. The filmmaking reinforces this, the excellent sound mix especially, with its layers upon layers of explosions and gunshots at multiple distances from multiple directions. But the editing by Joel Cox and Gary D. Roach, also Eastwood regulars, is equally on point, charging ahead during the overt action scenes and giving the more languid chatting non-combat scenes an erratic vigor, a constant sense that even if we're relaxed now, we're still in the middle of a fucking war zone. And then there's the more direct matter of how the film frankly depicts the messy suddenness of human death by bullets, small geysers of crimson that pop out of human bodies, Iraqi and American alike, with unromantic proficiency, leaving nothing to the imagination. It does not, by any measure I'm able to recognize, suggest that being in war is exciting. Unlike the very similar The Hurt Locker, nothing in American Sniper suggests that Kyle is an adrenaline junkie or flirts with a death wish, and the increasingly washed-out expressions on Cooper's face, coupled with the unyielding desaturation of the images, clearly indicate that it's taking a lot out of Kyle to be in that environment. The question the movie focuses on, then, is why he's there, and why he keeps going back, why, after having killed a child right off the bat, he'd keep placing himself in a position where his only task is to keep killing and killing. The best scene in the film shows Kyle training his scope on a little boy wandering around an RPG launcher, quietly begging him not to pick up the weapon, not wanting to shoot another child, feeling visibly sick at the thought of killing another child, and yet it plainly does not occur to him as an option not to kill the child if it comes down to it. Why does Kyle do this? The film silently asks, and then it even more silently answers, because he doesn't have the imagination to conceive of anything outside of the moral code he has always lived by, even when it causes him anguish, even when his wife, importantly, the only other human in the film given even the vaguest semblance of an inner life, tells him straight to his face that his beliefs are wrong and causing pain, even when his great "I shall be a hero and slay the dragon" moment is reckless and ends up putting the exact same American soldiers he was heroically saving into more active danger than if he'd just sat there and done nothing at all. He wanted to turn himself into a machine, and he succeeded in doing so, and the movie stares at him without judgment or praise as he goes about that process. And when his refusal to look inside himself means that he can neither acknowledge privately nor even consider as a possibility the reality that the actions he has committed and the actions he has witnessed have caused him to suffer from PTSD, the movie stars non-judgmentally at that, too. But the longer it goes on, the more it trusts us to see that disorder peering out from behind Cooper's increasingly flat eyes, and understand that his desire to avoid human feeling is increasingly a desire to avoid naming his own suffering and thus his own perceived weakness. All of which makes it epically frustrating when the movie ends by descending into a maudlin, arch-biopic sequence of leading up to Kyle's death while back home in Texas, playing as a straight-faced version of the same life is happening. Montage that's used to such mercilessly ironic effect in the film's opening, and ending on the corniest "he's off to meet his death" scene since the penultimate scene in 2012's Lincoln. And having thus pointlessly fucked his own movie, Eastwood doubles down with a travesty of a montage of images from the real-life Kyle's funeral and memorial services, a sequence that's exploitative to begin with, and also moonily plays up the notion that this was an unambiguously wonderful man whose passing is much to be mourned, which is found nowhere else in the movie, and indeed is almost exactly contradicted by its persuasive argument that this was a prickly man whose refusal to look inside himself caused only suffering in himself and others. It's a different, vastly worse movie, the movie, in fact, that American Sniper has been accused of being, by liberals, and praised for being, by conservatives, but that it emphatically isn't for some 127 of its 132 minutes. But oh me, oh my, how shittily pandering those 5 minutes are. Meanwhile, is it racist? Not really, but it doesn't do a very good job of inoculating itself against that charge. There's one scene in particular, involving a made-up insurgent assassin with a penchant for drills, that doesn't serve any meaningful narrative purpose and provides almost the entire basis for the argument that the film as a whole presents the Iraqi people as bloodthirsty brutes, and even that isn't quite a slam dunk piece of evidence, given context. Mostly, though, American Sniper simply doesn't care very much one way or another about the people of Iraq, an apparently damning statement, until we mention as well that it doesn't care one way or another about any American, citizen, or soldier, whose surname isn't Kyle. This is a character study, not a political statement, and the only real sin it commits is presenting that study in a framework that is entirely impossible to strip of politics, and could only be perceived otherwise by somebody with a reflexive America-centric worldview. A sin that somehow didn't taint the equally apolitical Hurt Locker, despite that film actually coming out when the Iraq War was still officially ongoing. That being said, it's a marvelous, marvelous character study, driven by a superb central performance and unpolished, spare filmmaking and writing that allow that performance to be the motive force of everything else the film does and is. Some of what it is ambivalent to the point of being problematic, a tiny bit of what it is acutely vile, and most of what it is a smart, complex portrait of a largely fictional man who desperately wanted not to be complex at all. What the film's reception reveals about American culture is uniformly discouraging and depressing, but as a 2.25-hour piece of cinema made by an inconsistently great director who got his mojo back in a huge way after too many years of burnished mediocrity, I come about as close to loving American Sniper, and even with its ugly-ass flaws, I wouldn't trade it away for anything. In all the media hubbub surrounding American Sniper's unprecedented $89 million haul this past weekend. Many commentators have been quick to call its subject, Chris Kyle, a real-life Captain America. This reveals a lot about the picture's relationship to an idealized American hero, whatever that looks like, and is a good entry point into discussing the film itself. American Sniper is an ambivalent war picture about a jingoistic action hero who racked up the highest kill count in American military history. It is based on a book written by that hero, Chris Kyle, and follows his perspective while serving in the U.S. military, depicting the world as he saw it, good and bad. It shows his loyalty, his racism, his patriotism, his refusal to recognize his own PTSD, and his own stalwart belief in the U.S. mission in Iraq. Does all this make the film patriotic or conservative or even jingoistic? I'm not convinced that depiction equals endorsement here, nor do I think that the film is unquestioningly supportive of the war on terror. It just follows a soldier who is. Moreover, American Sniper is a fascinating film regardless of that debate. It is tense, often thrilling, conflicted, and curiously ambivalent towards its character's mindset. It depicts a conservative U.S. Navy SEAL sniper who believed he embodied American ideals by killing Iraqi insurgents, and it lets us sort out what that says about America in the here and now. Clint Eastwood's film begins with Chris Kyle played by Bradley Cooper, who tones down his natural charisma and lets the character's physicality do much of the talking for him on a rooftop in Fallujah, spotting for threats to an American convoy moving through town. He spots a guy on a roof talking on a cell phone, then sees a woman holding a grenade move into the street with her son. Does he shoot? Eastwood doesn't answer the question right away. He cuts back to Kyle's childhood, where his father teaches him to use his natural aggression to defend the defenseless, to be a sheepdog, instead of a wolf or a sheep, in his father's parlance. Kyle clutches to the role like a dog to a bone. In the following scenes, where we see Kyle working in the rodeo and then joining the SEALs, he is trying his best to create the narrative that he is a sheepdog, a defender of justice and protector of the innocent, instead of just another wolf. It's pertinent to remember that this movie is based on Kyle's memoir, which means that it's based on a man writing his own narrative. Kyle tried throughout his life to live up to the expectations of a good patriot, to be a real-life Captain America, if you will. The fact that he lived up to it in many people's eyes, or that he might never have lived up to it, or perhaps even that his worldview allowed the government to turn him into an impersonal killing machine, gives the film its interesting wrinkles, despite the fact that it's based on his supposedly triumphant first-person account. This tension makes American Sniper fascinating and worth dissecting. Just because a man says he's a patriot doesn't mean we ought to believe him, nor does it mean we should immediately dismiss him. Kyle speaks of killing insurgents in order to save his fellow soldiers and stop terror from spreading to the U.S., but he wears a Punisher emblem on his helmet and on his ammunition cartridges, like he's a character out of a comic book. He talks of duty to God and country and family, but he never reads the Bible he carries with him and seems eager to leave his family when enjoying shore leave. Chris Kyle is a contradictory figure. The film doesn't ignore these contradictions, even if it never makes a grand declarative statement about them either. It's also important to understand that Chris Kyle isn't the director of this film. Clint Eastwood is, a man who's made a career of exploring the relationship between violence and masculinity and whether men can ever abandon their violent pasts. Be sure to keep that authorial distance in mind. After showing Kyle's formative experiences, which include his joining the SEALs and meeting his wife, Sienna Miller, we go back to that rooftop in Fallujah and follow Kyle through 4 tours in Iraq. American Sniper doesn't give much of an external perspective to any of these tours. We're never even sure of what year it is. There are scenes of Taya at home in Texas, but they're always connected to Kyle's direct experiences in some way, like through a phone call. We're experiencing the war as Kyle does, not as an objective observer would. These experiences are often tense and terrifying. Being a sniper is all about patience, and Eastwood is patient in depicting the film's numerous action scenes. His camera isn't chaotic. He loves to push in on Kyle's face as he's looking down the scope of his rifle. The camera tracks parallel to the barrel, emphasizing the natural lines on screen. He favors a point of view perspective from the scope in many instances, spying on possible targets, allowing us to feel the tension of whether Kyle will or won't shoot. Eastwood knows what he's doing here, and his best scenes are as tense as moments from Catherine Bigelow's The Hurt Locker. However, not all of American Sniper is as expertly crafted as the scenes on tour in Iraq. Some of the scenes of Kyle at home with his wife and kids grow tiresome as Taya constantly protests Kyle's abandonment of his children to do another tour of duty. Perhaps Sienna Miller's representation of Taya Kyle is true to reality, but she fills the stereotypical role of the nagging wife. Her frustrations are understandable, but that so much of her characterization relies on them is disappointing. Surely Taya Kyle had other struggles that defined her as much as her frustration with Kyle's absence. But, then again, this is a character study of Kyle, or at least, of how Kyle wanted to see himself. Perhaps he put Taya into the role of the nagging wife in the narrative of his life and career. Another unanswered question, another complexity. Eventually Kyle finishes his tours and we follow him back home, where he struggles to readjust to normal life away from other soldiers. He even seeks out to help wounded veterans, not seeing his mission to protect his fellow soldiers as finished. The film closes with real-life scenes of Kyle's funeral. Title cards indicate that he was killed by a fellow veteran suffering from PTSD, complete with patriotic flag waving and military salutes. I was reminded of John Krakauer's Where Men Win Glory, The Odyssey of Pat Tillman, about a very different American soldier fighting in the War on Terror. While Tillman's liberal atheist contrarianism and Kyle's traditional conservatism are as far apart politically as you can get, both men saw themselves as unequivocally doing what was right by joining the military. Both men also fueled the military propaganda machine, directly or indirectly. Their narratives were co-opted and became another narrative that served another purpose. Is Clint Eastwood's American Sniper further fuel to the propaganda machine that drives recruitment and glorifies trauma-ridden soldiers? Or is it simply commenting that this is the state of the United States military culture, whether the viewer agrees with it or not? Clint Eastwood is too smart an individual to blindly glorify a killer of hundreds without questioning what drove him. This is the man who made Unforgiven, after all. American Sniper is a fascinating look at this complicated man, this American killer. Chris Kyle might not have been a real-life Captain America, but a significant number of people believe he was. Eastwood's film explores why so many people do, and what that says about America. American Sniper indeed. American Sniper is a movie, directed by Clint Eastwood, which has been getting a lot of attention. Way more attention than I expected it to get, at that. And I don't quite know what to make of that. I mean, a major blockbuster in January. Clearly, this isn't the first time a movie has gotten caught up in the hype only to end up being not all that incredible when viewed as a film. The Interview, anyone. The politics of a film detracts from the film itself, undoubtedly, and because of that I don't want to delve into the controversy over American Sniper. Because the real truth is that, regardless of my political leanings, I didn't really enjoy this film. The film stars Bradley Cooper as the eponymous sniper, Chris Kyle, who has been labeled the deadliest sniper in U.S. military history. Kyle served 4 tours as a United States Navy SEAL in the Iraq War, amounting in a total of 10 years served. He was later murdered in 2013. Cooper, arguably, is the best part about this movie. His performance is nuanced, and, considering his is the only character that really has any substance to it whatsoever, it stands out. Aside from Cooper's character and, from time to time, his wife's, Sienna Miller, there is no entryway into having sympathy for any character in this movie. When one of Cooper's buddies dies in battle, there isn't any emotional resonance, and at times there is only the question as to who the man was in the first place. It is this emotional detachment that leads to where the heart of the problems lie with this film. The flaw is not in Eastwood's direction, or in the intricate sound work or cinematography, but in the concept of the film itself. It is quite possible to dig your way into Cooper's character, but beyond that the movie is left to flounder. It would be hard to call this an action film, so the sequences that show the Iraq conflict are purely there for their aesthetic value. This is simply because, after the opening scene of the film, it is established that Kyle's job was oftentimes difficult, where he was forced to aim at women and children. After that scene, the battle sequences do not do anything to further his character. If the soldiers that Cooper engages with are more properly developed, then perhaps these scenes would act to show the stereotypical theme of war movies, that war is hell. Without the emotional connection to any other soldier, the scenes of Cooper laying prone and eyeing down possible targets don't do anything to enhance the film. And these scenes are a large portion of the film. The remaining scenes of the film, where Cooper is back in the States, do act to show the struggle that is returning to everyday life after experiencing the trauma of war, but these scenes are disjointed and disproportionate to the portion of the film that takes place in a war zone. A lot of Clint Eastwood directed films are quite terrible. I found $1 Million Baby, Invictus, and J. Edgar unwatchable. Gran Torino was made watchable only because it embraced the cranky old man chasing kids off his lawn cliché so earnestly that its badness was somehow hard to look away from. Sully was a weird attempt to turn the National Transportation Safety Board, a government institution tasked with ensuring that every plane, train, and bus you ride in the United States is safe, into a villain. And yet, his popularity as a director endures. So clearly his films, their tone, content, and style are speaking to a part of America that I don't really get. With the benefit of hindsight, this should have given some warning as to the shit sandwich that was coming down the pipeline. When it was released in 2014, American Sniper blew up the box office. It grossed $350 million in the US and almost $550 worldwide. It was a runaway hit that found a home in the hearts of America's conservatives the same way The Passion of the Christ did. It appealed to red state Bible thumpers and jingoistic gun wavers in the Deep South, Big Sky Country and Appalachian Mountains. A large section of America absolutely loved this movie about Chris Kyle, the deadliest sniper in American military history and a good old boy from Texas who embodied the SparkNotes version of American values in the way he could ride, fight, shoot and drink. Not only that, but he was turned loose in Iraq to wreak divine vengeance on the enemy, saving the lives of countless American soldiers in the process as he extinguished evil from this earth. He ultimately died a martyr's death, not on the battlefield but still in service to his country, trying to save those who came back from war. It is the perfect movie to appeal to people with simple worldviews. The movie establishes that Chris Kyle has a black and white sense of morality, and it never questions whether he is right or wrong. It takes that black and white mentality, and reinforces its rightness by portraying the Iraqi insurgents as evil incarnate. It depicts Iraqis in general as untrustworthy others, and more or less justifies Kyle's killing of them in the interest of saving American lives no matter what. The film is thus built entirely on an oversimplified us vs them dichotomy, and any ambiguity people might have is driven away by directorial choices. The most famous scene in the film is the opening, where Kyle is forced to shoot a kid because he is about to throw a grenade at a convoy of Marines. The moment is loaded with tension, and we are to understand that Kyle was forced to make difficult life or death decisions on a daily basis. Yet, his decisions are always excused by the caveat that killing Iraqis saves American lives. The kid was bad and Iraqi, so let's not dwell on it. This is, of course, too simple by half. It strips any nuance or moral ambiguity from what is and was, in reality, a deeply ambiguous and complicated situation. It never questions the fact that the United States invaded a sovereign country, threw it into chaos, and then sent snipers out in its cities to kill Iraqis who opposed the invaders. Instead, we cheer these snipers for killing our enemies. We cheer because the enemy is defined as anyone who isn't us, who doesn't love our God, or our way of life, or look like us, a dangerous understanding of reality that in 2017 is becoming increasingly entrenched in American politics, society, and life. This is why this movie is deeply problematic. It offers a simple binary interpretation of a complex situation, and then goads you into cheering for your team without questioning the beliefs or circumstances underpinning their actions. And Americans cheered. They cheered to the tune of $350 million. The media of course fell right into this trap. They fact-checked the film, noting some of its problematic aspects and the fact that Chris Kyle had a tendency to exaggerate and fabricate stories, while openly referring to the Iraqis that he killed as savages. This is exactly the kind of criticism based in reality as it is that conservative culture warriors cannot handle, because it undermines the simplicity of their worldview. If the impossibly good Iraqi killing machine is actually not impossibly good, and if Iraqis do not all deserve to be killed, then the house of cards upon which tens of millions of roadkill aficionados are resting their ideas about life would quickly come tumbling down. The fact that so many people did love this movie, vehemently defending it because it appealed to their tribal instincts in a way that was back then not yet entirely clear, should have tipped us off to the fact that the national nightmare of Donald Trump was nearly upon us. That so many people had either forgotten, ignored, or never learned the lessons of the Iraqi war, and indeed were willing to close tribal and racial ranks behind a simplified reimagining of what happened there should have tipped us off. In a remarkable piece for Rolling Stone, Matt Taibbi seems to have had some inkling of what was going on before the rest of us. Sniper is a movie whose politics are so ludicrous and idiotic that under normal circumstances it would be beneath criticism. The only thing that forces us to take it seriously is the extraordinary fact that an almost exactly similar worldview consumed the walnut-sized mind of the president who got us into the war in question. It's the fact that the movie is popular, and actually makes sense to so many people, that's the problem. Why didn't you warn us sooner, Matt Taibbi? I will say that on the merits as a film, Bradley Cooper is truly excellent as Chris Kyle. I think this was where I finally realized Bradley Cooper is a deeply talented, real actor, not just a movie star. So maybe that is ultimately the takeaway from American Sniper. It heralded the arrival of a supremely talented actor, while hinting that parts of the country were buried so deep in their simplistic tribalism that they would be willing to let a fat orange idiot drive the country into a dumpster as long as he reinforced their worldview. Two autobiographical true stories of Americans embroiled in conflict arrive in cinemas this week. Documentary Point and Shoot, which holds the narcissism and naivete of its self-styled American freedom fighter in Libya up for the world to see, and this Clint Eastwood biopic, which is determined to celebrate its all-American gunslinger/Navy SEAL sniper Chris Kyle with a minimum of questions asked about the world beyond the end of his own garden path. Both suffer from the problem of viewing conflict solely through the prism of American idealism. This is not to say that Eastwood's film isn't worth a look, and you might even say there is something subversive about the fact audiences may well come away from it thinking about the positive aspects of more gun control, even though the subject is never mentioned outright. He brings an intensity to the story of war through the eyes of Kyle, one of which is frequently trained down the sight of a long-range rifle, ready to pick off anyone on the streets of Iraq, young children and women included, if he feels they pose a threat to his brothers. Bradley Cooper, bulked up beyond the point you would have believed possible, plays him with a focused sincerity that, coupled with the script, soft pedals on the real-life Kyle's less appealing attributes, such as the racism which, in his book, led him to brand Iraqis savages. The film opens with him making his first kill, a child brandishing a grenade, with a simple but effective match cut throwing us back to his first deer kill in childhood, that leads to a lengthy flashback showing how his finger comes again to be on the trigger. Kyle has had the notion of protecting others drummed into him by his father, who tells him that in a world of sheep and wolves, the trick is to be a sheepdog. It's doubtful whether the average sheepdog killed upwards of 160 wolves and called it duty, but Kyle has no problem with his job, and Eastwood's film pushes the idea that war is hell misses the point. It's coming home that is truly infernal. Home for Kyle is as American as apple pie, with a loving wife, Sienna Miller, and 2 kids. Coming back after the concentration and decision-making required on the streets of Fallujah, however, is something the grueling SEAL training doesn't prepare him for. The post-traumatic stress disorder, never mentioned by name, that he suffers from is, again, viewed entirely from his perspective. He sees it not as a result of any lingering worries he may have about killing people, but because he can't do the sheepdog thing anymore. The film, though gripping and enjoyable as a piece of Hollywood fiction, is problematic because of its factual origins. By presenting Kyle as a protector in a kind of new Wild West against natives we never get to know, Eastwood fully allows the viewer to merely nod sagely in agreement with Kyle the legend, sympathetic to his plight but without so much as a backward glance to the blood of others he waded through. It also presents PTSD in the most simplistic terms, suggesting that it doesn't take much more than a quick chat with other veterans to bring you back from the abyss. Fable and fact make an uneasy mix. Navy SEAL Chris Kyle is the self-proclaimed most lethal sniper in the history of the United States military, with 160 confirmed kills out of a suspected 255. Is it healthy to idolize a man like Kyle, whose skills pertain to mankind's most awful innovation? War cinema invariably invites the dilemma of reality, often encouraged by incautious patriotism. Kyle is no doubt a brave man with some extraordinary ability, but Clint Eastwood's American Sniper makes a point of celebrating his lethality rather than his valor. Military is an unfortunate necessary, but that doesn't make it any more appealing. There's something inherently perverse about entertaining war cinema considering the distressing nature of bloodshed. Spielberg's Saving Private Ryan and more recently Peter Berg's Lone Survivor suffered from a curious focus on camaraderie amidst action scenes designed meticulously to incite thrill. These form of thoughtless war films denigrate the incredible companionship that soldiers must experience as well as diminish the fortitude that they demonstrate on the battlefield. These are films that make us revel in the simplicity of situations that just aren't simple. How can we be manipulated so that we're glad when a man is shot? American Sniper is an entertaining action film, but it shouldn't have been. There's a startling directness in which the Iraqi troops are alienated in Eastwood's film. They're clearly delineated as the enemy with little thought as to the realities of a wartime adversary. This might be the natural and understandable conception of a soldier in the United States military amidst the turmoil of conflict, but it surely couldn't represent fact, and it certainly doesn't represent humanity appropriately. Consider Kyle's chief rival, an elusive and deadly Syrian sniper, whose presence is heralded by ominous music. It's the portrayal of an enemy, not a man. Biased war films are inherently difficult because they force us to support the characters that we're privy to, in this case the American soldiers. We want them to survive. We want them to kill their enemies. Far more considered is Eastwood's approach to the concept of murder as employment. American Sniper presents information and leaves judgment to the viewer. How does one detach themselves from their deeds in war? Crucially, apicing Kyle's tours of duty is his family life back home in Texas and his commitment to wife Taya, Sienna Miller. There's a sense that Kyle is hurting his family life more by dismissing the adverse effects that his job might be having on him. Bradley Cooper as Kyle offers a complexity that belies the rest of the film. Kyle joined the military at the relatively late age of 30 but demonstrated promise quickly, eventually joining SEAL Team 3 in combat during the Second Gulf War. There's a turbulence to Cooper's performance, pushing Kyle beyond caricature into something startlingly real. His confidence wanes between false and genuine, as does his modesty. We're never sure how Kyle feels about the lives he's taken because the man probably doesn't know himself. Cooper is perfectly understated, and considering the actor's renown, it's impressive how easy it is to forget the element of performance. American Sniper is not so much a war film as it is a modern spaghetti western, with a gun-toting Kyle facing down his enemies in a broken-down, lawless environment. As an action film, Eastwood's film is successful, thanks in no small part to a magnetic central performance from Cooper. Eastwood has a natural instinct for cinema, despite a reluctance to push himself creatively. But does the Gulf War deserve more consideration? Is it irresponsible filmmaking to present such a complicated scenario without reflection? As an experience of sensation, American Sniper is gripping, but intellectually it's jarring. After weeks or maybe even months of seeing the trailer for American Sniper, which can only be related to a teaser, it really was a fantastic trailer which made you want to come and watch the film, to find out if he took that shot. Great way to promote a film, and even better that it actually started with that scene. But we don't get to find out straight away. The suspense was very good, building that up even more as we started to learn a little about the man about to pull the trigger and his past. I thought the story was told in an incredible way, wouldn't expect anything less really with Clint Eastwood in the director's chair. The way it built him up and gave us a good understanding of his background really helped to explain his motivation and determination to do things. Something which would really help him to make it as a SEAL. A natural shooter, as his father told him after his first kill hunting in the woods. It is an incredibly emotional journey as we see him quickly become a hero amongst the troops with his skills of shooting from up above and keeping a watch over the troops on the ground. But his determination to do even more really did push it to the limits. He wasn't just going to watch all of the time, he wanted to be even more involved in it all. He completed 4 tours altogether, and we can see how he was becoming more and more detached with life when returning home after each tour. He seemed to be very addictive and did not communicate very well with his wife and young children after his stints away. It was quite heartbreaking to watch at times, especially when his wife had to listen to gunshots and fire over the phone a couple of times. Can't really think of much worse to listen to than that. Bradley Cooper really does put in a fantastic performance and certainly bulked up for the role. We felt sorry for him but could also understand his reasons for wanting to keep going back. He wanted to keep saving more men and felt that it was his duty to protect everyone back at home. Some of the scenes really were touching and hit a core. I had no idea of the outcome of the story, so was devastated at the very end. I won't spoil that in case you don't know the story either. I honestly just sank, and then the no music over the credits after video footage and photos was really hard-hitting. Everyone just sat still at the screening I was at. There really are some good films based around war, and this one is certainly one of them as well. I think with it being a very recent story makes it even harder to watch as well. Kyle became a legend for how many enemies he killed and how many of his own troops he managed to save. Something which much inspire the people who are out on tour. I have to give the Academy some credit. At least one of the movies they nominated for Best Picture was one of the best movies of the year. American Sniper, the story of Christopher Kyle, the most lethal sniper in U.S. military history, is a great film, an important film, and I hope every theater showing it is as packed as mine was for this film. How is it that we've been at war now for well over a decade and no one cares? Maybe you do, but in the conversations I have and the overall effect it has on daily life is negligible to non-existent. Whatever you may think about the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, they happened. They're still happening. US troops are fighting and there are no massive protests or national dialogue about it, and for all the talk of supporting the troops, which seems to be the line du jour when it comes to the men and women who have experienced this conflict, there are still plenty of troops in harm's way and they return home to find themselves struggling with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and a variety of other after effects that mar their new reality. For a deeper look at what soldiers are facing when they return home, check out the very powerful book Thank You for Your Service by David Finkel. The point I'm leading to is, where is Hollywood in all of this? The oh-so-politically vocal Hollywood was all over Vietnam. They'll spit out films on any social issue you could think of, but since 9/11, how is Hollywood handling the event that changed all of our lives and the aftermath? Largely, they're not. There have been two powerful films about this period in history, United 93 and Zero Dark 30. There have been others made, but those two are the only ones that come to mind when I think of this topic. Those films, though, are primarily about the 9/11 attack and Osama bin Laden. American Sniper is the first powerful movie that examines the war in Iraq, and it does so with brilliant acting and superb direction. American Sniper follows Chris Kyle, Bradley Cooper, from his start in Texas as a cowboy, his meeting and marrying his wife, Sienna Miller, and his induction into the Navy SEALs after September 11th. Kyle is motivated by patriotism and by an ingrained desire to take care of the men he serves with in the war. He feels he has a gift with his ability to shoot, and with that ability he can save the lives of the men going door to door while he watches over them from a perch. This call to duty is so strong that it sent Kyle back to Iraq for 4 tours of active duty, and the film deftly examines the slow erosion this service has on his marriage, his health, and his very soul. I like Bradley Cooper, and have felt before this that he was a very good actor. I think Silver Linings Playbook is incredibly overrated, but he was good. I think American Hustle is one of the greatest showcases of acting in the last decade, and thought Cooper held his own with Christian Bale, Amy Adams, and the rest of the ensemble. Both performances, each nominated for an Oscar, were very manic, energetic, and comedic. Cooper in American Hustle is a completely different animal. He's incredibly bulked up. He looks every bit a SEAL, and, though Kyle has a very funny sense of humor, the man at his core was someone with incredible anger toward those who would bully the weak. He and his wife have a fantastic relationship. Cooper and Miller have great chemistry and you genuinely like them as a couple, and establishing this makes the strain put on their bond by the war and the toll it takes on Kyle heartbreaking to watch. Kyle also clearly is battling PTSD between tours, and the film finds clever ways to smoothly integrate this into the overall narrative without changing the flow of the story. It's very clear the price Kyle is paying for his service when he's at home, and the small triggers that everyday life contains, and how stressful and uncomfortable he is. Cooper was nominated for this film, and, not only does he deserve the nomination, he deserves a win for Best Actor. The other star of this film is Clint Eastwood, who took over this project when Steven Spielberg backed out. I've written an entire piece on Eastwood's directing, click here to read that retrospective, but suffice it to say that I have been frustrated by many of his efforts. His movies tend to be ponderous in their pacing, often glacially so. If you had sat me down and had me watch this film, I would never have guessed Eastwood directed it. This is the best film he's directed since Unforgiven, but that's the quintessential Western. It's his genre and he hones it to perfection. This film is 145 minutes, but flies by with taut direction that keeps Kyle's story moving and compelling whether he's trying to pick up his wife in a bar or he's deep in a firefight. Eastwood uses angles and shots I never would have expected from him. The final rooftop firefight where he's cutting perspective from the men on the roof, intercut with drone shots overhead that show their tactical position, was to give the audience an entire picture of the battle without exposition. Despite all that, and a deserved Directors Guild nod, Eastwood didn't score a nomination for American Sniper, but he has so much hardware on his mantle at this point that it's hard to build up that much rage. I'm just so impressed with a man in his mid-80s, stretching himself and getting better and better. I haven't seen any preliminary numbers for this first wide release weekend for Sniper, but my theater was sold out with people sitting on the stairs and in the hallway. The film elicited tears from more than one man sitting around me. The word of mouth on American Sniper should be stellar. It's a powerful film with a great performance, direction from a legend at the top of his game, and an amazing story of an extraordinary man. It also gives people what may turn out to be the defining film of the Second Iraq War. The movie seemed to be gaining momentum with voters moving into the Oscar nominations, and I hope that momentum continues to grow. This is a film worthy of a Best Picture Oscar, and I'll be rooting for it. Chris Kyle was the deadliest sniper in U.S. military history, with 160 kills across 4 tours of duty in Iraq. For the Iraqi insurgents he was enemy number 1, there was a $180,000 reward for killing him. For the U.S. military he was their guardian angel. Knowing he was looking over them made them feel invincible. Kyle was a man that became a U.S. military legend. Unfortunately, Clint Eastwood's American Sniper is more concerned with showing us the legend than the man. As a child, Kyle's father taught him there are 3 kinds of people in the world: sheep who won't stand up for themselves and will be abused, wolves who seek to bully and harm others, and sheepdogs who are blessed with the gift of aggression and use it to protect the weak and innocent. Chris Kyle is a sheepdog. Inspired by the embassy bombings in East Africa, he joins the Navy SEALs and before long finds himself in Iraq. As he grows in standing, his missions become more specialized. Having been assigned to team to take out the infamous Al-Qaeda operative known as the Butcher, he also becomes obsessed with capturing an Iraqi sniper named Mustafa whose skills rival his own. In a magnificently intense opening scene, we see Kyle in action. Positioned on a Fallujah rooftop, he looks down on a U.S. military convoy, his eyes peeled for anything suspicious. He sees a woman and child leave a house ahead of the convoy. The way she moves leads him to suspect she might have something concealed under her burqa. She hands something to her child and he starts to run towards the convoy. Is it a grenade? He's not sure. He radios for confirmation, but no one else can see it. His commanding officer gives him the green light. He now has to make a choice. Is it a grenade or isn't it? Does he shoot or does he not? This is a different experience of combat to what we are used to seeing on screen. We have seen the fast and frantic battle, where split-second decisions are the difference between life and death. But this is slow and calculated. He has time to think, to consider the repercussions of his actions, to make a decision. This is the most interesting element of the film. With such a strong opening, it is a shame that nothing that follows can equal its intensity. With its primary concern being to anoint Kyle as a hero, American Sniper dedicates no space to debating the merits of the Iraq War. There is an acknowledgement that this is a different type of war, one in which women and children are being used as soldiers, but the film deems the war to be a noble cause of which questions are not to be asked. This is largely the result of the film being presented from Kyle's point of view. He has a blinkered approach to this conflict, viewing Iraq as an evil place and the Iraqi people as savages. Eastwood makes no effort to humanize the Iraqi characters, with Mustafa in particular shot like a comic book villain. With no sense of the overall purpose of the war, Eastwood reduces it to a series of gun battles, or, more to the point, reduces it to Kyle's personal effort to catch Mustafa and the Butcher. The film does give some time to issues like PTSD and the struggles of veterans to reacclimatize to civilian life. Kyle is shown to become increasingly more comfortable with his unit in Iraq than he is back with his family in America, an idea explored slightly more effectively in Catherine Bigelow's The Hurt Locker. However, these issues are largely peripheral and sit uneasily next to those more frequent moments in which Eastwood can't help but play up the heroism and inspiration of the story. The struggle when trying to tell the true story of an admired war hero is the pressure to honor at the expense of honesty. This pressure is heightened when one considers the absolute reverence in which America holds their armed services. American Sniper is undoubtedly a heartfelt film. Both Cooper and Eastwood seem really invested in it, and it has some very strong moments, but the film's over-the-top heroism and chest-thumping patriotism will be harder for non-American audiences to get behind. American Sniper is an engaging glimpse into the head of an iconic soldier, Chris Kyle, a Navy SEAL veteran and a badass sniper. The biopic juggles between his love life, his sniping badassery, his fame and the mental state aftermath war that had him vexed for a while. American Sniper goes on to show how war gradually takes its toll on soldiers. It manifests through the yearning eyes of Kyle how he would always prefer an explosive battlefield to a quiet time home. As soon as the screen goes dark and the movie begins, we are subjected to an enthralling booming bass that echoes power and might, depicting annexing right. All thanks to the boom operators of the flick. A tank shows up, an apt manifestation of annihilation, like a devastating predator crushing rocks. It walks alongside soldiers on a mission. Not far away, a sniper rests in a prone position on a roof alongside another soldier, searching his target with rapt attention, cracking jokes. Entry: a lady hiding a grenade, earnestly waiting for the convoy to arrive. She is accompanied by her son, to whom she slips the grenade. The child rushes towards the American convoy, fully fledged, unaware of the crosshair, and bang. The deafening noise takes us to the past, to the hunting grounds where a father is busy teaching his son to shoot. Such brilliant direction. The prologue is so beautifully shot that you almost know that you are in for a treat. The story captures every aspect of the legend with whom American soldiers felt invincible. The flick features all his 4 major tours. There is a beautiful melodramatic side story showing his wife wanting his husband home. What it also beautifully captures is the aftermath of war turmoil in a soldier's head. This film, directed by Clint Eastwood, screenplay by Jason Hall, based on American Sniper, produced by Clint Eastwood, starring Bradley Cooper, cinematography Tom Stern, edited by Joel Cox. Production companies: Village Roadshow Pictures. Distributed by Warner Brothers Pictures. Release dates: November 11, 2014. Running time 132 minutes. Country: United States. Language: English. Budget: $59 million. Box office: $547.7 million.